Cool. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I have an extra special guest, Wallace O'Donnell on, fresh off going 5-1 at the Las Vegas Open with his incredibly creative summoning list. Wallace, my friend, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Really cold where I'm at right now. It's like negative 20 degrees outside. But that's just how we roll in Alaska.
Exactly. So for everyone that doesn't know, Wallace and I are friends up here in Alaska. We actually stayed together down there. It was beautiful to go to Vegas and see sunlight and warmth and people besides moose. It was just a beautiful, beautiful trip.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah. And actually the funny part was both Wallace and I, we ended up winning best in faction for our respective armies, but leading up to the tournament, actually, neither of us were really that enthusiastic about the 40K side of things. The crazy thing was Wallace literally threw his list together, what was it, 3 hours before submission? You just kind of threw together based on what you had?
Yeah, so I know what the submission deadline was, and me deciding to go to LVO was a last minute decision. So I thought I'd have more time to kind of play test and brew something before I did end up, committing to the event. And I didn't actually choose just models I had. What I did is I found out about 3 hours before the submission deadline, and I was kind of in a panic trying to assemble a list of models that I knew were good and might work. So I brought some of the old classics that I had practiced with in the past. So for instance, kind of the core to my list, and something that I think won me the majority of my games actually, was a 9-man brick of Nurglings. I knew about the 9-man brick of Nurglings. I knew it was good. I'd always put it somewhere in my chaos builds before. So I just included that. I knew Be'lakor was pretty good. I liked his interaction with having multiple different marks. I liked the synergy across different chaos demon archetypes. So I decided to include Be'lakor. I thought he'd be kind of the muscle to my list, the hammer kind of unit that does a lot of damage. I brought a Lord of Change that I built with kind of my classic Mortal Wound Super Soaker build, where I just gave him the Lord of Flux, so he's doing lots of bonus damage. I gave him a bunch of damage powers, and I gave him the Warlord trait for -1 damage to weapons that target him, and then the Impossible Robe. So he was just really hard to kill, and he splashed around a lot of mortal wounds.
And just to clarify for anyone that isn't very familiar with demons, Lord of Flux is an exalted reward, which Wallace bought for 1 CP when writing his list. They give, every time he does damage with mortal wounds, he does an additional mortal wound, which, spoiler, it will come up later with some powers that do mortal wounds to multiple units. It's extremely powerful on a Lord of Change. Yeah, so you had the Nurglings and Lord of Change. What else did you have in the list?
So those were kind of like the core identities of the list. And then I just brought some objective security units. I brought 2 small 3-man units of Nurglings. I like them. You can usually hide them somewhere on the mid-table. They're hard to see. You can usually put them behind obscuring terrain. And they have a really small footprint, and they're OBSEC. So they kind of help to either provide anchors in your own deployment zone or to snag the midfield objectives really early on into the game. So those 3-man Nurgling units were pretty nice. And then I brought 2 bricks of 10 pink cores. And that was, I think, in almost all my games, really important that I both brought a unit that was an infantry and brought a unit that could theoretically split. And that makes up kind of the battalion I brought. And to kind of go along with what I was doing, which was a lot of move-oriented, move-blocking, objective holding, I wanted something that provided me with kind of a shooting angle or a ranged threat, because I didn't really have that yet. And I was looking through, there's not a lot of options for that in terms of just what demons as a codex offer, so that potential allies I could bring along with them. So that said, do you want me to touch on the Thousand Suns stuff quite yet?
Yeah, well, actually, first I want to talk about, because you've got the Demons attachment and the Thousand Suns attachment. You said you were looking for shooting. Was there anything else you considered besides the Thousand Suns? Did you look at maybe Death Guard Plague Burst Crawlers or Chaos Demon Engines or Noise Marines?
So I didn't just want something that shoots. I wanted something that shoots, but also kind of plays into what I was already doing well, which was board control stuff. So I was looking at something that brought maybe objective secured, maybe a good number of bodies, and then some firepower. So I did look at taking Chaos Space Marine Terminators at first. They felt a little bit expensive, and it was, I don't know, I just wasn't super sold on bringing that specific unit. I also had a lot of CP in my list that I could spend. I started with 9, and there wasn't a lot of stratagems I was, spamming.
Sure.
So I was looking for a faction that used CP well, and that would kind of push the board control aspect of my list. And after thinking about it for a while, and granted, I did only have 3 hours to look through this stuff. I decided to take a look at Thousand Suns, and I was flipping through some of their stratagems, and there's one that really caught my eye. It was the 2 CP stratagem in the Thousand Suns Codex that allows you to forward deploy your Rubric Marines.
Yes.
Yeah. It was pretty cool. Now that Rubric Marines are 2 wounds, they have some really nice survivability strats. I decided that it would be kind of synergistic if I had a giant brick of Rubric Marines with objectives secured that I could start on the table like towards the midfield objectives, and then use the Nurglings as move blockers to protect them. I armed all of my Rubric Marines with bolt guns, just because they also have a 1 CP strat. I think it's called Infernal Fusillade or something like that. And it gives you an additional shot with each of their bolters. Yeah. And that I figured would be kind of the only horde clear that I would start on the table. To go along with those guys, I brought a unit of 5 Chaos Spawn, which are quite good with the Thousand Suns now. You can both choose to invest psychic powers on them, or more importantly, just hide them until they get a good chance to charge, and they can do some serious damage now. And I paired that with Ahriman, because his powers are super good. He's super good at casting.
Sure.
He all of the awesome bonuses that you can ask for, and he has quite a bit that he can throw out a turn. And I put an Infernal Master with him. The Infernal Master ended up being one of the best models I decided to bring. It has a prayer that gives you a free single dice reroll once per turn. And that, in conjunction with Gaze of Fate, that my Lord of Change actually was a really excellent pairing that allowed me to pull off a lot of cheeky strategies. So that kind of made up the core of everything that I brought to the table. I think the real nuance of what allowed me to perform well actually wasn't my list. It was the fact that I had 245 very flexible summoning points.
And there we go. Yeah. And that's one of those things where I think people have, I guess it's kind of a classic pairing. You saw even back in 8th edition, demons, some board control, some Thousand Suns for some shooting and psychic damage. But you don't really see the summoning. And I think this actually kind of ties into your 40k background, because you're a long-time Chaos player. And your playstyle has always been, you're not someone that kind of looks at like the best units everyone's running and tries to cram them into your list, but rather you really like think about every unit in the codex, like what does it bring to the table? And I think maybe in a less experienced player's hands, they're looking at these summoning points and they're thinking they're just for like splitting pinks or something. But I know you had an enormous variety of potential options based on the matchup. Can you talk about some of the, or I guess in a practical sense, the units you brought with you to the tournament that you thought you may summon?
So I brought a box. Be'lakor having multiple different chaos marks was super cool. There were times when he stood still to summon for me. But things that are examples of stuff I brought fiends. I brought a contorted epitome. I brought a big unit of 9 flamers of Zenich. I brought an exalted flamer. I brought, of course, all the stuff I need to split horrors if that's what I decide to do.
Sure.
I brought extra Nurglings. I brought Chaos Furies. I brought Sloppity Bilepiper and a Herald of Nurgle. I brought pretty much all of the summonable characters I could actually bring out at 245, with the exception of like a Greater Demon. Any of the Greater Demons I did not bring.
No, and that makes sense. So when you're writing your list, I guess one of the questions a lot of maybe newer Chaos players struggle with is how much of the list to devote to summoning as opposed to actual units in the list. So the 200, I think you said 245. How did you arrive at that as opposed to putting more units, or even like taking some stuff out and putting more in the summoning? How did you talk about that decision?
If you look at the points costs for most of the points in the book, what you'll find is there's kind of this 160 summoning point breaking point. What I mean by that is most of your infantry units that you want to summon are going to be around that 80 point margin. And really, if you're summoning each game, you're going to want to summon at least 2 units. And infantry are typically the ones that I like to summon because they provide you with a lot of bodies to contest the midfield objective. So 160 has always felt like the minimum I usually like to bring, because deep striking a unit, even if it's on turn 3, 4, or 5, which is usually when I'm doing that, feels really powerful in a lot of games. I mean, there's a reason you can't hold back, some of your summons until turn 4 or 5. So I like to have at least 160 points, but what it settled me on 245 was mostly the fact that I wanted the option to be able to either summon more characters or make my characters unkillable. And at 245 points, you can make I think it's 20 blue horrors and 20 brimstones pretty easily, which is so many wounds that you can just say, okay, yeah, I'm going to expose my pinks on this backfield objective this turn. But unless somehow your entire list is shooting them, it's pretty much going to bounce off. And if you do target your whole list into it, I'm going to choose not to split and just summon another unit back their next turn.
Sure. And that's what's so interesting about the blue horror, or excuse me, the pink horrors as a, I guess, kind of objective holder. It's the only unit in the game that you get to allocate wounds after they've allocated their shots. So for example, they have a unit of 10 Vanguard vets or whatever. They'll easily wipe out 10 guys plus a bunch of splits. You don't have to put the points there. You can literally save the points. Whereas in their shooting phase, I know you're a very, very much a thinking player. You can look if they only have one unit that has an angle to shoot them, and it has 10, 15 shots. You know that you can guarantee with splitting that you will have bodies left on that objective. And again, as much as people, say Chaos lacks a lot of tools that other codexes have, really that's a unique tool in the entire game, and something I'm really happy to see that it worked as well as you thought it would.
And here's another example. Be really, really effective. I had a game against Manny Chima in round 5, and moment in that game, because it was pretty back and forth up until about turn 4. There was a moment where I had about a 10 victory point swing in my favor because I chose to split, and splitting can allow your pink horror unit to go above its starting size. So I was able to split enough horrors onto an objective as I was removing casualties that I ended up with more models on the objective that were objective secured than he had. Yeah,
and that's what people don't realize is the entire horror unit is objective secured. So even all the blues and the brims coming out, they still are objective secured. And did you ever have, because as someone that played Necrons earlier in the edition, it was really cool when you reanimate, you can bring guys towards objectives. So did you ever use that to kind of gain distance or end up closer to the opponent in their turn?
I did have a couple really things I did with splitting where I strung units forward a little bit in order to kind of provide me with more of move blocking. But there wasn't too much of the classic strategy of I'm charging you, you overwatch me, I'm going to summon a horror slightly closer to you than I had part of the charge. That's kind of an old strat to make easier charges for your pinks. For the most part, I was using the 10-man squads pretty well so that when I got them on an objective, I would space them out enough that almost nothing else could touch that objective. They're really small 25 millimeter bases.
Sure.
It wasn't super important for me to kind of gain extra reach towards objectives, but it was something I was thinking about if it did come up.
Okay, no, that makes complete sense. So you've got this, because just from talking to you, 40K over the years, I know you're very much a toolbox player. And what I love about this list is you don't have perfect answers to everything, but you have some sort of answer for everything. So I guess at this point, I'd love to talk to you again. Having finished 5-1, your only loss to Manichima's infamous Rax list. Yeah, if we can go matchup by matchup. And I think there's one game and there's one story that when you told me this, I literally burst out laughing. And I'll be honest, I can't wait. I just want to get this one directly to the viewers. Coming into the tournament, you mentioned that Knights were one of your worst matchups. And I agree, on paper, you can't really kill Knights. And, you know, 3 Magaeras or whatever, or a bunch of lightning locks shooting at your big guys, that's not good for you. So I know round 4 you faced a Knights list, and it was, you know, basically the one thing you wanted to avoid. 3 Magaeras and a few of the smaller armigers. I think it was 4 armigers, 3 Magaeras. And on paper, that's just a horrible, horrible matchup. I think you end up having a resounding win. Wallace, my friend, can you please talk to me and tell me how you managed to beat 3 Magaeras with your pillow-fisted summoning list?
Well, I think this is just as important as the outcome. So the game previous to my, I think it was my 4th round opponent. Yeah, it was my 4th round opponent. Was actually against Blake Law. And he had brought in a list that was similar. He was the Quester Mechanicus with the Magaera. But he also had brought in I think like a patrol detachment of Mechanicus units to kind of play the midfield.
Yeah.
So the fact I got to play Blake before I got to the 4th round was super important because it gave me a lot of experience in actually playing against this list with somebody that knows how to handle it. Because in the lead up to this tournament, I knew that this was one of my bad matchups and I practiced a bit against it. But most of my practice came down to, well, I sure hope that they aren't able to get to that objective, or I sure hope it's not on this mission. It wasn't a lot of like figuring out easy ways to deal with Knights. I was trying a lot of things like summoning Flamers in, spending 1 CP on the Flamer strat to pump out some mortal wounds to try to chip down the Knights. I was trying summoning contorted epitomes and doing all other kinds of wacky stuff to disrupt their game plan. But it was having a lot of difficulty and it just felt really bad. I mean, the fact charge in, their stomps just absolutely thwomp your Nurglings. Their firepower can take out even the Lord of Change if they're able to dump enough there. So it's a huge challenge. So I played against Blake. I got a lot of experience playing against Blake, kind of learning exactly how it is that you play the matchup when you're playing it well. And I managed to eke out a win, mostly off the fact that I was able to move block him in his deployment with my Nurgling units. And it was on I think it's called Vital Intelligence. It's the one with the data terminals. So there's a lot of on the table, and I was able to just kind of get a incremental lead off of that and continue to summon things on those objectives. But going into round 4, this is like I beat a tough guy, and now here's his bigger, older brother, because this list was like, the previous one's 2 Magaera. Well, it's how about 3 Magaera and a bunch of Armiger Warglaves. And it's just a nightmare. So I'm stressing myself out and thinking, how am I this guy? And I'm looking over his list. And something dawns on me that I hadn't thought about in a while, which is the fact that the Magaera are characters. And so I thought to myself,
well, I just want to jump in quickly just to say here, people don't understand. I think you're like at the table. You were, because we stayed together. I think you were literally in your bed. I was in mine. The lights were off, and like you just bolted up suddenly, and then had this revelation, kind of like Einstein inventing stuff, where you just bolted up with this idea. And what was your idea there?
My idea was, well, if they're characters, that makes them susceptible to treason of Zinich. So it's like it was an epiphanic moment where I was like, "Holy crap, can I do that?" And so I went and confirmed that I could, in fact, do that. And I was like, well, here's the problem number 2. I don't have Treason of Zinich in my list, and I can't just swap powers.
So I just want to quickly jump in for anyone that doesn't know and quickly explain how Treason of Zinich works.
Treason?
Please explain it.
Treason of Zinich is the secret sauce. It is the fine spice that you never touch.
Spice,
Pull it out when it's right. Treason of Zinich is a psychic power. I think its range is 18 inches. And it's rather difficult to get off. I believe the cast value is like an 8.
It is an 8, yeah.
But when you do manage to cast Treason of Zenich, you can target an enemy character and roll 2 dice. And if you roll above their leadership, you get to control that character for the following shooting phase, charge phase, and combat phase. So that's a very powerful effect. But typically, if you are using Treason of Zenith, you're targeting like a Space Marine captain, and the whole leadership thing usually doesn't work against most lists. Like, I would love to use it on Trajan Valoris, but he's got like an 11 leadership or something. Yeah. So it's usually not that great of a power in the end, as silly as it can be. But what's nice is I was looking at the Magaeras, they're only leadership 9. So there's a chance there, right? So I was thinking the issue then was, well, I don't have Treason in my list. Well, here's why summoning's good, guys. You can bring Treason into your list. You just have to summon a model that can learn Treason of Zenich. So I dedicated maybe the best 85 points of my life in that game into summoning out a, what are they called? A change caster.
Change caster, yeah.
The heralds for Zenich. And I decided to give this change caster a summon to Treason. And that one decision completely warped the matchup into what I thought was a really bad matchup for me into one that I think is pretty dang good. So what I did in game 1 is I strung out my Nurglings in a way to try to move block his knights as much as possible. And I very carefully hid my Infernal Master for my Thousand Suns behind a building that was obscuring towards the middle of the table. And my opponent goes first. He goes up, he kills all my Nurglings, and he's got all 3 of his knights cloistered around the middle objectives. They're all pretty close to one another as well. So I'm stuck in this tough decision of how I'm going to deal with the sensual blitzkrieg of all of these Knight Magaeras. But that's I get to hatch my wonderfully Zenichian plan. I advanced forward a unit of pink Nurgling, sorry, pink horrors, and I left a spot in the center of them just big enough to fit my my change caster space in. And I measured everything out, and I dropped in my change caster. The nice thing is, even though his knights are behind the obscuring terrain, they still have enough wound count that I can count them as visible models. And as I summoned the caster, I went ahead and cast my Treason of Zenich. Important things about my movement that phase is I had advanced my Be'lakor up the table so that I could get him in range of this knight and provide -1 leadership penalty.
Yeah.
So cast with a change caster. Change casters have a lovely 1 CP strat called Minions of Magic. It causes you to auto cast their spell as if you rolled a 9+.
Yep.
So I pop my 1 CP, I get a free Treason off, and now the very critical 2 dice roll to beat his leadership. Thankfully, I rolled exactly what I needed with that -1 penalty.
Yeah.
And I was able to steal his knight.
And so, actually, just to clarify, I want to clarify for anyone. Well, you can't CP reroll things like the leadership roll. Just because your list, again, you do have the prayer, which gives you 1 free reroll, plus the Gaze of Fate. You can reroll. So if you failed, you still had a chance. It wasn't an 8. It was an 8 rerolling, which at that point is pretty darn good odds. I think that's about mathematically equivalent to a 2/3 chance to take control of his knight. Which, I mean, that's the kind of gamble you just 100% of the time have to take if the opportunity presents itself.
Right. And I did need it. You actually have to beat the leadership. You can't match it. But getting a knight was not a problem because I naturally rolled 1. So I didn't even need to re-roll anything.
Yeah, because the -1 leadership from Be'lakor made him down to an 8. Beautiful.
Yep.
Beautiful.
It's a little synergy there. And this is just a key example of remember your rules, because if I didn't know all of the rules that were in conjunction here, this wouldn't have worked. But it did allow me to steal one of his Magaeras. So what I did next is what I can describe as my most satisfying psychic experience ever.
Here we go.
I steal the Knight Magaeras, and I go to the shooting phase, and I dump all of my shots into his other knight. And he rolled decently hot. He rolls bad on his saves, and his knight dies. The other knight dies. But I still have this knight I've gained control of for the charge phase and for the combat. So I charge into his other knight, who is his warlord, and I roll high enough that I'm able to engage him. So I decide to swing with my Knight Magaeras into his Knight Magaeras, and I do enough damage that I brought his Warlord down to like 1 or 2 wounds remaining, which already, beautiful. But the thing is, in 9th edition, you can't choose not to attack with the model anymore. So
exactly.
it still has to activate into my model. And so he's mathing it out how exactly he wants to attack into my Knight Magaeras with his. He's trying to do the least amount of damage possible. So he chooses to stomp. So he stomps at my Knight Magaeras, rolls decently, and I have to make my armor saves. Well, the thing is, you can choose if you want to make your armor save or your invuln save if you have an option. And I had a 5-up invuln save. So I chose to make my invuln save instead of my armor save against his stomps.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that I knew that he had forgotten. His Warlord has a, I believe it's a relic called Executioner's Mark. And the Executioner's Mark increases damage.
Oh, I think we just lost the video for a sec. There we go. Okay, now you're back. Yeah, yeah, the Headsman's Mark, which, yeah, go ahead.
Right. It increases the damage that the Knight would do to other vehicles by 1. And if it's targeting a Titanic unit, which it was because it was targeting one of the Knights, it increases it by 2. So his stomps weren't doing D3, they were doing D3 plus 2.
This is the stuff legends are made of.
I rolled 1 save, which would have maybe been enough to keep his Knight alive. So I CP rerolled the save for his Knight.
And so just to clarify, let's keep track here for the viewers at home. Shooting phase, you kill 1 Knight with the Knight you control. I assume there's additional or other random stuff, but 1 Knight basically shoots 1 Knight dead. Yep. Then the Knight you control charges a Knight, gets that one down to 1 or 2 wounds, so almost 2 Knights killed right here. And then that Knight on the clapback kills the 3rd Knight. So this one 85-point model, 85 points. Someone managed to take out 3 Magaeras, which for the folks keeping track at home, about 1,400 points, so close to 1,500 points right there. 1,500 points for an 85-point model. That sounds like a pretty good, haven't run the numbers, but that feels pretty strong to me.
And there's one more layer next. So he's
here we go.
Attacking kills my Knight.
Yeah.
And all to explode, and it exploded. And then it
Get out of here.
Well,
get out of here.
For Warglaives, and it did damage to them as well. And we mathed it out at the end. It did like almost 80. This one psychic power did almost 80 damage to his list, and it killed all 3 of his Knights with 1 cast.
I mean, this is the kind of thing you can't even make up. So I guess at that point, what did you guys just like? How that interaction afterwards? Because assume afterwards, did you like say like, "Hey, I'm sorry for this"? Was he like, "Hey, man, that's game," or how did that go?
Yeah, so I walked him through each of the interactions as I was doing it. Made sure to show him each of the rules multiple times throughout it because he had a lot of questions about it. Obviously, I would too.
Very understandable.
Okie, and it's not a rule that they would make in a 9th edition codex, I don't think. But I walked him through the process of how it works. He checked my rules a couple of times to confirm. And I mean, after that, he was just shell-shocked. He had never seen that happen before. Honestly, I had never seen that happen before. I'd never heard of that happening. But I don't know what to say other than after we were done and we'd done the cleanup from that turn, he essentially was like, okay, I'm ready to concede.
I mean,
it's just, we ended up playing out a couple of rounds. He hit his Armigers in the backfield just so I could score points, but or some points for the game we played. But we both knew that it was over after my turn 1. So
yeah, I mean, that's just incredible, and that's why, you know, for all the justifiable flack Chaos fans give GW for not giving them a 9th edition book in terms of demons and Chaos Space Marines yet, we can still be thinking we'll still have some jank that should not survive in the game anymore. Because no, Genestealer cults had an equivalent power. It wasn't, but a very similar power that was removed from their codex. So it's very likely we're going to use it. This might be the last LVO ever where something like this was possible. I mean, what an amazing note for Treason of Tzeentch to go out on. I mean, that's incredible.
Right here in my well, that's probably my peak as a 40K player, regardless of any other tournament that ever happens. I don't have gotten a chance to come up with a plan and then just as planned my opponent. It felt perfect. It felt very Zenitchian. And I was just, from that point forward, I was just happy. Nothing could faze me for the rest of the tournament.
Exactly. Because, I mean, Zenitch really came to protect you. You cast 9 with Minions of Magic. You rolled a 9 on the leadership, exactly what you needed. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, 40K dreams are made of. So I think with this game at this point now, we've kind of established how you won this game. I think killing 3 Magaeras is a pretty good way to beat a 3 Magaera list. Can you talk about how you got the win against Blake's list? Because Blake's an experienced player. I came up to you guys afterwards. I saw the end of the game. You both had a great rapport. Seemed you both were really enjoying yourselves. Can you talk about how you beat that list? Because the AdMech component, I definitely know he had some of the horses. I know he had some of the OBSEC Rangers and Vanguard that would give you more of a trouble than traditional Knights list. How did that game go?
That game was a game lost in the movement.
Okay.
The way I spaced out my 9 Nurglings, because I did manage to get the play on him, I spaced it so all of them were 2 inches out of one another. And I was bring them out both in the pre-game phase so that none of his horses could really move because they can't move with a unit. And in when I got my first turn, I had been using player placed terrain to kind of predict where the knights would go. There's spots he could actually put them in his deployment zone. So I was able to more or less during the player placed terrain portion of the game figure out where those knights were going. I held back deploying my Nurglings until I deployed them last of all my units. Very atypical. Normally I deploy them first. And when I got the play, I made a big advance with my 9-man Nurgling brick. And the way I spaced them around the terrain made it so that there was nowhere the knights could physically possibly move and end their base more than an inch away from my models. So effectively, he could shuffle his knights maybe 3 inches on his first turn. He could not move them anywhere. He could not advance them anywhere. He couldn't full tilt to grab an objective and then charge me. He was pretty much just gummed up right at the start of the game, away from all the objectives. My first turn, I really didn't accomplish much. I was using obscuring terrain to really hide change in Bellicor. They pretty much nothing on their first turn.
And on your first turn, you didn't do a lot of damage, but you gained a lot of more control in terms of blocking the knights from moving forward.
And that was the game pretty much, is me just either summoning things to block his path or things at him to slow him down. I had a couple cheeky plays. I threw Armin kind of to the wind to cause him to kill a 5-man unit of Mechanicus and steal an objective. I was doing like that kind of stuff all day. And since it was a hold 1, hold 2 mission, I had stopped him from scoring anything on the primary for the first 2 turns. And from that point, despite him being able to max score most of his secondaries, he wasn't able to win the game. I also had a cheeky strategy where, because of how I spaced my Nurglings, I was able to pull enough of my Nurgling models from the 9-man unit that his other knight wasn't able to consolidate close enough to swing, or pile in close enough to swing.
Sounds good. If you can pull outside of 4, because they can pile in 3, can attack within an inch. If you can pull outside of 4, that's kind of strength of these big units when they're strung out. They charge from multiple directions. They can definitely get themselves in a tough spot. So I guess probably, I think let's just do for the viewers at home. In the game, what was the total you summoned that game? Because I saw some flamers on the table when I walked over.
Yeah, I think I summoned like a 5-man unit of flamers. I wasn't summoning that game. I did summon a small unit towards the end just to chip off the last model on an objective. Because I was at keep his points as low as possible.
Okay, that makes complete sense. So let's see. We've talked about the 2 nice games. I think we're going to talk about well, let's actually get straight to the game I think everyone else is super curious about. Because I know Manchima is a well-respected player. Nothing against him. I know there are a lot of people rooting against his specific list of 170 racks. So you had a lot of support there. Can you talk about how that game went? Because, I mean, that's one of the lists that was, I think you were his lowest score of the tournament. So I think you came closer to anyone until he finally lost in the shadow round, or towards the end, in terms of how to beat all these racks.
So this is going to be a grind getting into it. Everybody knows that. It always is a grind against a rack. And I really don't have enough board clear to really manage to kill quite enough of them. I decided not to go the ritual on this mission. There was only 2 midfield objectives, 1 in each deployment. So it was pretty much a game of me putting things on the midfield, him pushing me off, me pushing him off. What almost won me this game, because I was ahead for the first 3 turns, and he was for the last 2, and that was what sealed it, was the unit of Nurglings, a 9-man brick. I strung them in such a specific way, since I had the play on him, that I was able to summon a Sloppity Bile Piper with Bellicor, and it allowed me to advance in charge with my Nurgling unit. And that 1 unit of Nurglings tied up about 80 racks in his deployment. And they were, I mean, he was stuck there until about turn 4. He couldn't move much. I kept using Nurgling Infestation to bring model back. The Nurglings are super tanky with Warp Surge, and racks are really bad at killing Nurglings, actually.
Yeah, and this is something that when I was thinking through the game, I was like, well, you know, this issue Rex have a lot of attacks. They come in, they're going to charge and kill all the Nurglings. And they kind of did the math in my head, and it really wasn't nearly as scary as I expected. So let's quickly run through. Let's say there's a unit of 20 racks. I think he had like weird numbers like 17, 18, let's just say 20. 2 attacks each, plus 1 more in the Sarge, let's just say 40, keep it simple. They come in, they hit on 3s. That's what, you know, 30, let's say, just keep it simple, let's say 30 hits. Let's just round up. Really close to like 20, mid-20s, but let's say 30 hits. They're poison, which normally the toughness 2 of Nurglings is an advantage. But to poison weapons, Nurgle has truly protected you. They still only wound on 4-up. And then you get the invul, and then you get the -1 damage. And really the math is literally less than 2 bases killed by a full block of racks hitting you. And Drukhari, they do have a stratagem, yes, to fall back and charge with 1 unit. But again, it's only 1 unit. The rest of the army is tied up. And I mean, the board control you've gained from all those Nurglings is just incredible. So what ended up winning it for him?
I lackluster choice secondaries. Obviously, he gets pretty easy because he has that 1 built into the book where you get, you know, 2 victory points for each board quadrant I'm not in.
For the prey, yeah, which is pretty absurd, but we can keep going.
Right, he was able to more or less max that one out on turns, because I actually denied it for most of the game. What ended up winning the game was eventually my Nurgling wall broke. They did their best. I had some poor decisions in terms of positioning, which did make me lose a 5 victory point swing earlier on in the game. And it was just, I mean, it was really close. He beat me off the last 2 turns, being able to kind of overwhelm my backfield objectives, denying me scoring. So there's some things where if I could have gone back and done it slightly differently, I feel like would have actually sealed me the win. But I don't have a ton of experience playing against the rack list. I know the basics of it, but there's not anyone in the Alaska area that plays that style of like thick city nonsense. So it was a learning experience for me. And it was actually for Manny too, a learning experience. He said he learned quite a bit during the match about how to play it against demons next time, because it was a point in the game where I kind of had him in a stranglehold over the midfield. So it was a really good experience. And overall, I think he played the game super, super well. And I needed to really just play that much slightly better.
And that makes complete sense. I know when I walked over again, it seemed like you guys were having a really good time. I'm getting along super well. And you always love to see games like that. Like your game versus Blake too, you know, just guys, you know, playing their best, but also, you know, still having fun, getting along well, playing a friendly game. That's the kind of stuff that everyone, even at very big, very competitive tournaments, should still aim for. I know we covered, that was your 1 loss. Quickly run through your other 3 games. I guess let's just start with games 1 and 2. What were those matchups?
One was Genestealer Colts, and that experience highlighted exactly why Genestealer Colts are good, which is I felt like I was winning the whole game. I was killing stuff. I was pushing them. I was claiming stuff. I was doing my secondaries. And still, it was really close. Just kind of pop up, be irritating everywhere, steal objectives from you. They do their secondaries really easily. And he had a slightly more mechanized list than most Genestealer Cult players, who trucks and stuff. But I was just slapping things down all game, and then they would pop. So there was that. Then there was a Sisters player who deployed his characters a little bit too close to the unit that was supposed to be bubble wrapping them. And I was able to line up a really huge Infernal Gateway with my Lord of Change, so that the nearest model was within 3 of almost all of his characters. I advanced on a 6.
Just go quickly jump in and just to clarify for anyone that doesn't know, Infernal Gateway, it's a really cool power. And again, it's a little bit of 8th edition jank. 9th edition codexes are generally on the whole moving away from things like this. But the way the power works is you select the closest visible model, I think within 18, or 12 or something like that, the closest visible model. And then that unit, and then every other unit within 3 inches of the closest model takes a D3 or D6 mortal wounds if you roll high enough. Now this does combo with Lord of Flux, the exalted reward you took, so that every unit that's hit takes an additional mortal wound. So you can have a situation where the front units get hit, and then every unit within 3 inches of that model is taking D6 plus 1 mortal wounds, which means one of those things, if it goes off once, there's a lot of matchups where that's just game. That's just the game right there. And what I think is really cool about the way you've played, I've seen you use this strategy before, is that you can manipulate which model is closest. Can you talk a bit about that?
So this actually, because the Lord of Change has those nice little wingtips, if you obscure most of your model but are able to draw a good line of sight with the tips of your model's wing, you can kind of selectively choose which model is the closest visible. And that is a nice way that you can manipulate the battlefield to your advantage. I got a huge 6 on my advance, so I was able to get close enough to do this, manipulate it so that it was hitting the exact model I wanted it to, or equidistant from 2 models I got to choose. And I rolled high enough that I got the D6 version, and I did D6 plus 1 mortal wounds to his sister squad, another sister spy, and all of his characters. And I wiped out every single character he had in that one move. And it felt like I won the game from there. The rest of it was just finishing off what was left of the squads. And those were my first 2 games. Blake's game and I was a really good back and forth battle towards the end of it, but I had control over most of it. And then my final game was against a Drakari player.
That's right,
yeah. And he had brought a pretty interesting Drakari list that had a lot more raiders and stuff. He had the more Lich Hellion kind of list. And I just got the play on him and made a big Nurgling charge and tied up just about his entire gun line. And that really, really bogged him down in his deployment. So I was able to kind of overpower him on most of the objectives. And, I was able to get Be'lakor up the table and just wipe out a good number of vehicles. So a good matchup for me.
No, and that makes complete sense. What's really cool about your list is when you have so much forward deploying, because you have the rubrics that can forward deploy and the big Nurglings and also the small units around the edges, scoring you points. You have to make a choice, right? Where any firepower that's going into your Nurglings is firepower not going into your rubrics and not going into Be'lakor, or vice versa. And it sounds like when you go first, just in terms of playing the mission, they have to deal with the rubrics and the Nurglings up front, or they just a bunch of OBSEC in front of their army move like, and that's kind of, they can't deal with that. So did you find that, let me say like this, did you find generally, were you playing Be'lakor very cagey? Were you kind of getting off the board? Because I know generally because of the Lord of Change and Be'lakor, there's not always easy to hide both on the approach. How did you kind of think about that in terms of what you were exposing early in the game?
So I actually Be'lakor, the Lord of Change I was really aggressive with because, like you said, if you're not focusing my rubrics or my Nurglings, I win the game because I just score more than you. And so my Lord of Change, he never died. The lowest he got was 2 wounds left in one game.
Really, the entire LVO, he didn't die once.
Not a single. I was barrel stuffing all kinds of people with his psychic powers. Like, doesn't matter what the closest model is when everything's 1 inch away. So
that's fair.
I was just flying right at people, dunking mortal wounds on them, not really caring if they shot at him or not. That felt really good. And then Be'lakor, I was playing more cagey with because he actually is an important piece to my winning plan. He actually did the ritual a lot for me because he was hiding able. For instance, in the Blake game, I did kill 2 of his knights with Be'lakor just by being really cagey with him, charging only when I felt like one of them was exposed and the other one really couldn't, provide much of a rebuttal. That allowed me to kill off both of his knights with Be'lakor. But because of that, Be'lakor managed to, managed to survive the tournament as well. So neither of my beefcakes died. Really, that was one thing that I noticed that was pretty interesting. I didn't play lists that could expose them well enough behind the player place terrain. And I do have to, player place terrain is something that this tournament sold me on. You can really actualize the strategies you want based on the way that you set up the battlefield. And that was actually huge for me in pretty much every game. The way that we structured the battlefield really impacted the outcomes.
No, and that's super interesting. I'm really glad you talked about that, because player place terrain, I think, is one of those things that at first, just like you, I was kind of hesitant about. I was like, well, I'll add like 5 minutes to the game as we deploy the terrain and stuff. But I think what's great about player place terrain, and your list showed, is that it does give more strategies a chance to be viable. Like on the GW style terrain, which I think is a great terrain. I think I've played on it before. I think I've enjoyed it, or a lot of really interesting close games on it. But there's certainly some units, like I played against Great Ants, it was literally always the same thing. Turn 1, interceptors get behind the front wall. Turn 2, they go outwards. They play the angles with getting Dread Knights around the corners. I feel the games kind of play similarly once you practice it enough. Whereas player place terrain, whatever kind of wacky strategy you have, you'll have the terrain needed to, at least on your half of the board, make it work. Can you kind of talk me through your process when you're placing terrain? Like, were you always trying to, because it sounds like you're a big Warp Ritual fan, were you always like trying to cover the center point, or are you like more on the objectives on the side? What was the, kind of talk me through the Wallace thought process? Terrain.
I played about what the end of turn.
Sorry, can you start it again? I think the audio just cut out a little bit.
Hello?
Yeah, okay, it's good now. Yeah.
So I play player place terrain, not thinking about what I want the start of the game to look like as much as what I think about what I want the end of turn 1 to look like. So I imagine what their turn 1 will look like into me and what mine will look like them. And I try to predict exactly how they want to place their models. With some players, like with Manny's list, it's really obvious. He puts one obscuring opposite in the middle, and he's just dumping all the racks back there. With other players, you have to think a little bit harder about exactly where they want to play their game. And the second thing I think about is, how can I deny them from having a board state that looks good for them? So for instance, in the game against Blake, what I was trying to do is I was trying to put all of the big pieces of terrain towards one side of the table, the same side he put his on. And I was doing that with the intention of kind of clogging it up so that his knights had to go in one spot, and that ended up working. So I was like, if his knights end up going over there, what does my turn look like? Where would I want to deploy my Nurglings when we move into deployment? And that was pretty beneficial for me. When you are taking the ritual, you do want to be thinking about obscuring the center. That matters more or less depending off of what kind of firepower they have. If you hide your Infernal Master there or Armin there and he's doing it for you, that's if you want to throw your Lord of Change at it, then you can always do that as well. So yeah, I was kind of visualizing exactly where I'd put my Nurglings when I was putting terrain down, and not just that, but I was visualizing where my Nurglings would then move to. So I was setting up a lot of situations where it's like, okay, I'll start my Nurglings here and then they'll move there. Like 3 Nurgling units too, I would place terrain around spots that I would want to hide them in or move them to. Or I would encourage my opponent to place terrain over there to hide his models, and then I would end up using the terrain for mine. So that was a lot of fun. I felt like there's a lot of game in there. And none of the times I did player place it feel like it took a very long time. So it did end up winning me over. I wasn't a huge fan before the tournament, but
yeah, it's definitely, it has its both fans and opponents. But I think exactly what you're saying, it really doesn't take that much time. Especially because at the end of the day, if your opponent's taking a long time, you can always call for a clock, and they're welcome to take all the time they need to place. They can take an hour, 20 minutes to place a terrain for all I care, as long as I get my time, and vice versa. So that's really cool. One thing I do want to get your general thoughts on other chaos lists, but in the meantime, I do want to talk about that for some reason, your list is going up in points. So I do think if LVO was held today, your list would be different. So a quick recap, and I've got to say, I was not a huge fan of these points changes. I think demons, they certainly have some good units. but I think that demons are not really a faction that needed a nerf to their units currently. But that's, is what it is. I can respect their decision. So just to clarify for anyone that doesn't know, Bellicor went up 20 points in your list. The Lord of Change continues his elevator into unplayability. He went up 10 points, I think. And the Nurglings went up, I think they're at 25 points. I think there's something we actually talked about while walking on the strip in Vegas. But now you've had some more time to think. How would you change your list? Because I think the Nurglings are probably the biggest point sink. Would you maybe drop a Nurgling unit for like a Brimstone Horror unit? Give me your thoughts.
Are all the points less public?
Yeah, all the points are public.
Okay. So with the point changes, I still think certain units make the cut. I think the 9-man Nurgling Brick, even though now they're 25 points a model, is still a great unit.
Okay.
If you want it to be kind of the centerpiece of your list, which I always do, Nurgling Infestation means the unit recursion can typically make up for the point increase. But I'm not going to bring those smaller 3-man units and Nurglings anymore. They're just not price efficient anymore. I would rather bring like a unit of 10 Demonettes, a unit of Horrors, a unit of Plague Bearers, unit of Furies. In terms of other things that went up, Greater Demons feel kind of weak sauce now. Yeah, there's some power in bringing like Keeper of Secrets, but
yeah.
I was never a big Keeper of Secrets guy. I feel like they're good, but they're one-dimensional, and there's not a lot of finesse or success I've been able to have with using them personally when I brought them to the past. So I'm not super sold on them.
Yeah.
And meant for instance, for the Lord of Change, I feel like the Lord of Change brought something unique to a game that no one else did, and I don't think I'm going to bring him anymore with the point increase.
Yeah.
So I kind of looked at the unjustifiable and spiteful point increases, and I was trying to find the needles in the haystack that were not for me. And one of them is, I've always felt that Flamers were really good, even at 25 point model.
Or, 23, but yeah, same thing.
Well, they were 25 for a while. They had gotten the price.
Oh, that's right. Second point decrease. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think on release they were like 25. But even back then, I felt like they were pretty dang good. And since then, they've gotten a couple of buffs, including their incredible 1 CP mortal wound cannon strat that just makes you do 1,000,000 damage. I really love that strat. It typically about 5 mortal wounds with a squad of flamers, 5 or 6, which is amazing into so many different matchups. And if you pair that unit with a Herald of Sneech and with a Flickering Flames, so they get the +1 to wound at strength 5, that can chunk through Custodes too.
Yeah.
Which is huge in this meta. It can chunk through Custodes, you can chunk through Racks. Those guys went down to 20 points. It's unbelievable. It's 180 points for a 9-man unit now. Yeah. They're infantry. They can do all the objectives you want them to do. Their Overwatch is amazing. Those guys, like, I'm going to bring 2 units of those now moving forward.
Yeah. And what people don't realize is, well, I guess people realize they just don't really think about, is that they're a 20-point unit, 2 wounds each, a lot of wounds for a pretty good price. Now for Warp Surge, you can give them a 3-up invuln still. In a game, in addition, where they're moving as far away as they can from 3-up invulns on almost everything, you can have this unit that's very killy, very mobile, can do all the actions, and then just on demand gets a 3-up invuln whenever it wants. I mean, that's a building block right there. I agree with you. Flamers are fantastic. I did want to talk about. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that feels like the big positive takeaway. That was the needle in the haystack drop. I'm bringing them now as a part of my list. I'm not just summoning them. I don't mind investing CP on making them do more damage or on deep striking. And I think now I'm no longer going to be a Chaos Demons player. I'm going to be a Disciples of Bellicor player. There was a lot of Chaos Space Marine adjustments that were pretty dang good. And I feel with Greater Demons taking a good punch to the gut, that now there's just not a selling point for me to stay regular demons anymore. -1 to hit no rerolls on my unit of 9 flamers. That's pretty stanky.
And this is what I really want to talk to you about. And I feel Disciples of Bellicor, and I feel like at the time when they came out, there was a lot of negativity. And I wrote this article saying, hey guys, I don't know if anyone's actually looked at these rules, but these rules are super powerful.
Mhm.
And I actually have a lot of people come up and tell me, like, straight up, like, hey, I keep reading this article whenever I disciples list, because there's literally no other information out there about them or really serious analysis. I think you and I have talked about this, Wallace, that for this year, I don't want to commit myself, but I will say I think it's very likely that we're going to play disciples as some of our primary armies this year, because I think they counter the overall game very well right now. I think large units and anti-large shooting is just out of control. High damage shots are way too prevalent. But we can complain about that, or we can adapt to that. I think a lot of the anti-volume firepower in the game kind of often relies around rerolls. Like, we're thinking of things like intercessors or aggressors that have hit rerolls.
Yeah.
And I think the Volkite Contemptor's nerf is amazing for disciples, because one of the big issues for Pink Horror blobs was Volkite Contemptors. There were a lot of AP0 with mortal wounds on top. That was very bad for pinks, and now those getting nerfed is really good for us. Well, so you kind of talk to me about some of the units you're most excited to run in Disciples, because I know Flamers, both in regular demons and Disciples, we can agree, an amazing piece to have. What else are you excited for?
Contorted Epitome, Rushes,
Yes,
and that unit just
it's a game.
yeah, it's a obviously I enjoy using Be'lakor, and I will enjoy continuing to use Be'lakor.
Sure.
I bring the Change Caster. Minions of Magic is amazing, and I want him to give me the jump on my Disciple of Be'lakor units. I'm bringing more bombs that I didn't really bring before. Before I was all about movement, less about damage output. Now I'm going to start moving into more about damage output. For instance, you can start a Flamery bomb on the table and move them forward. You can effectively play kind of like Orcs players used to play, where you throw out a big unit to your opponent and say, deal with it. It does a lot of damage. I use Bloodletters again. What an amazing, it still is amazing piece of tech. Right?
Love Bloodletters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're really epic when they come in and do their thing. And just the fact they're OBSEC, man, you gotta love it. That's active, your models on it are dead. So, I'm excited about the Flamer bombs. I'm going to start bringing a ton of those guys. Like I said, the 9-man Nurgling Brick is still just dirt nasty. That's going to kind of make up the core of my lists for a while. I think it'll be really good. I think it's going to be a lot better than what I was bringing before. And I still, with some of the lists I've been practicing and building, I'm still cutting myself about that 160 mark of summoning points I mentioned. Just because that's amazing. Like, being able to drop in a squad is still really dang good.
There's a lot of situations where we don't have, or demons don't have the psychic or the stratagem to swap out powers, but there's a lot of amazing situational powers. Like, imagine Infernal Gateway, you don't always want to bring, or something like Flickering Flames, +1 to wound on the shooting. There's some matchups that's really important. There's some matchups where it's basically relevant, and being able to summon in a Change Caster that knows that, super valuable. But imagine, like, for example, you didn't take Infernal Gateway in your list, and you're not going to run it, and then suddenly, like turn 4 or 5, it's not, you don't do gotcha stuff, but turn 4 or 5, they're just thinking about so many things. They don't really, again, they just have to cluster stuff on objective to maybe get a bunch of bodies there, and then you're like, hey, hold up, I can summon Infernal Gateway right now, and then auto cast it. I mean, there's so many just like game-winning plays you're gonna have available with those summoning points. And one unit actually I think is really cool in Disciples, Plague Bearers, which I think actually the other guys are really well themed as LVO. And this ticked me off, because I remember when Disciples came out, I was like, hey guys, can we talk about Plague Bearers? I mean, they're just -2 to hit, no hit rerolls, really tanky, and I was like, Plague Bearers, so bad. They don't compare favorably to Rax. Well, I can't run Rax in the Demon army. Drukhari players can't run Plague Bearers in their army. So at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter how they compare to Rax. I'm not trying to play a game of, oh, can I bring more Rax than my opponent? No, I'm trying to bring units that synergize well. I think Plague Bearers and Disciples are absolutely fantastic.
And
wish they were 8 points per model. Wish they were 8.
You can still provide your Locust to them. They're feeling amazing. I think smaller units of them are fine. 10 mans are perfectly what I want. And like I said, like it really depends on the matchup. And that's why you keep that 160 points in the bank, man. Sometimes you're just wanting more bodies on stuff. Sometimes, you know, maybe I want a unit of speakers to try to get on, get a big charge onto an objective. Maybe I want to, you know, throw out an extra caster to help me with the ritual or something, you know, or maybe even I want a 60-point Herald of Corn to provide +1 strength to my unit of bloodletters and help them slap down some custodians.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things. Something is so powerful. There's some matchups where strength 5 to strength 6, like killing Marines or killing Knights, literally irrelevant. And there's some matchups like Custodes where it makes all the difference.
Exactly.
Like if you're going to a jet bike and you're wounded on 4s instead of 5s with that huge volume of attacks, that's like an additional jet bike dead. Yeah, I think from the Chaos Space Marine side, because I think the strength of Disciples is the locus for the demons. The Chaos Space Marines don't get that. Are there any Chaos Space Marine units you're looking at, or you just want to stick primarily to the demons?
You know, I'm looking at. I always think Chaos Cultists are amazingly good, especially with the ability to be able to kind of redeploy them up the field with the Tide of Trader.
Yeah,
Traitors are.
Okay, just jump in quickly to say that Cultists are amazing because there's so many matchups where I'll take, you know, Rod, and I only have 1 unit in Deep Strike, so I can do my 2 quarters and then 1, or I guess retrieve Nachman Data or whatever the new name is. You can do the 1 quarter, and then it's like turn 5, you save it, and they just run out of stuff to screen, and just 2 CP, put those guys in the back corner, still troops, still do the action unfailable, or can at least like attempt to charge onto an objective. I think I like to have at least 1 unit of Cultists in every army I run, just for Tide of Traders. I don't even need it per se, just the threat of like, oh, hey, by the way, turn 5, I can finish Rod over there. Well, now they have sent resources back to screen after the game's getting messy. So sorry to cut you off. I love Cultists.
No.
Cultists.
Oh, that's all the stuff. And you just pop them wherever you need them. Sometimes you can even charge with them to steal an OBSEC objective.
Exactly.
Or great.
Yeah. Or so I know you mentioned Cultists. What other units are you looking at?
Obliterators. Obliterators. Not so much Obliterators with Slanesh. I don't think double tapping them is almost ever worth it. The 3 CP investment makes me upset.
Yes.
It's just too much of a cost investment. Now, what I do like looking at is Corn Obliterators. The Bloodmaster is only 60 points.
This is why I love you, Wallace. We're on the exact same page. I love you, man.
A bit of spice, but you give them like a Corn Herald, the Crimson Crown, and now you're popping veterans on them, and 5+ are going to be making you get additional shots. That's a 1 CP investment, 2 CP if you count the Herald relic if you want to buy the relic. But it's going to pump out a good additional amount of shots. And I think it's super good. I think it's super good. And I'm going to be with that because I think the Obliterators went down like 10 points or something. So
yeah, I think it used to be so I think they were 105, so it was 315. Now they're 95, under 100. I mean, they're still, again, I wish they were a little bit cheaper, but at the end of the day, you know, you can wish all you want. You just have to play with, you know, what you have. I think they're great. As you say, they're Corn Relic. Because currently, with the Crimson Crown, you pay 1 CP, you get 33% more shots. You used to get like 1.3 times the number of shots, or whatever. Or you pay 3 CP for vets plus double shoot to get twice the number of shots. You're spending 3 times more CP. Only gain 50% more shots. Corn Oblits are just, especially in an army like this, you want to spend stratagems for like auto-cast minions of magic, strat to charge through things, to tag things like tanks behind their screens. There's so many great strats. I think, Corn Oblits are looking super good. A unit I'm looking at is Warped Helms. I think they're priced to move now. Lightning Claws, always great. Even Custodes, when they turn off your rerolls, well, you still have +1 attack, you're still EP2, which is the perfect spot into them.
And they're
great weapon. Go ahead.
Terrain. Yeah. Oh, just like that. Move from obscuring terrain to obscuring terrain. On the table, you can hide them pretty well usually. So.
Yeah. No, I think especially as you send player place terrain, I think Disciples a list with a bunch of demons, get some Plague Bearers, get some Hinkhorrors, then Changecaster, Bellicor, Crimson Crown guy. What a lot of people don't realize is that even though you can't use disciples as a faction keyword, I've still seen some TOs actually allow this, even though it's specifically been FAQ'd, just because it's such a silly ruling. But you know, it is what it is. You play the game you have. You can still use the faction keywords as detachment keywords. So, for example, you can still have a Khorne detachment as your second detachment. You can have like a mixed demon detachment and a Khorne detachment with like a herald with a crimson crown, Khorne herald, and then Khorne cultists as troops, and then obliterators and heavy support. You don't even have to pay for a cast space marine HQ. I think they're all pretty bad, unless you're going to invest like in a lot of cast space marines to buff. So I think that's why I'm looking at my lists is like a mixed demon detachment and a Khorne patrol with a herald there. Or you can even, honestly, if you don't want a herald, you can straight up put Be'lakor, because it does have the Khorne faction keywords. You can have detachment. Your second detachment is like Be'lakor. There's a lot of options available.
Exactly. One thing I will say with Disciples of Be'lakor, there's a lot of room for implementation, and there's not a lot of people that are deeply trying it in a competitive sense. I did see Khorne, like they were like a mix of like Khorne and other greater demons, messing around with Disciples of Be'lakor too. I like a few of those lists, but yeah, even at LVO, there wasn't like one list that this is how you play Disciples of Be'lakor. I saw a lot of different builds and different degrees of success for each of these builds, but none of them that I looked at was like, this feels exactly right. So there's a lot of room for optimization in order to make something that I think is very competitive. And I think with New Point now, yes, it's very heavy-handed in certain ways. There's some units you just don't bring anymore. But on the other hand, maybe it's a blessing in disguise. It's forcing us to try to experiment with some other things and trying to encourage us to get into Chaos Space Marines more or to try out bigger Flamer. And these seem like good possible outcomes, you know? So a lot of list tuning, I'm sure, for myself. But honestly, it's going to be really nice to play a faction that has aggressively costed models again, because yes, certain things are too expensive now, but some of the really good stuff also got cheaper. So overall, I think kind of like side grade in terms of the points for demons and just a pure flat upgrade for Chaos Space Marines. There's some really good stuff in there that's worth bringing.
And it's one of those armies where I think anyone that's playing Disciples, if you try it for a game or two and it doesn't work out for you, don't be discouraged. Just because I'm not saying in the sense of like, oh, like you're bad if you don't make the army work. It's simply it's an army that requires experience, not just with 40k in general, but it requires experience with Disciples. It's all about the little tricks. I think bikers are actually kind of cool in Disciples because what you can do is like turn 4 or 5, you have to grab an objective in the back, strat to move through things, and they can auto advance 20. So I think there's I haven't found a list that I like them in yet, but I think there has to be something there, like a little MSU or something, just to harass. How many times there's like a little fragile HQ, like behind a screen, behind a vehicle, and you're like, oh, I can move 14 and then just charge through everything, and then oh, goodbye, I just throw a bunch of chainsword attacks and +1 to hit. Go ahead.
Or to Gene Stealer cults in a weird, in that make one bad. It's very movement. It's very oriented. You make one bad decision with the way you set up or move your models, you probably lose the game, and that is very punishing for a lot of players. And I think it's really discouraging, especially when you're starting to get back into the swing of things. But stick with it, keep playing it. I think there's a lot of power there. Or I don't just think, I know from experience there's a lot of power there. And once you start to master that movement side, the terrain side, you can really find yourself winning otherwise very difficult matchups. I actually think one of my Disciple builds, which hopefully I'll get a chance to feature soon, I think it unironically has a favorable matchup in Custodes. And with them kind of being one of the current boogeymans, that's a good place to be in. That means when you're hitting the most common matchup, you're feeling competent when you come into the table. I
just want to jump in and say, not only do you have a good matchup in Custodes, but again, as long as demons have their old codex, I think we still have a great matchup in your Grey Knights. Which,
Grey Knights easy.
Yeah, I don't know how early Grey Knights win. You turn 1, you just send a unit of Bloodletters, they kill a bunch of stuff. They kill it back in your turn, and then turn 2, you just do it again. But there's even more Bloodletters coming down because it's turn 2. Yeah, that's one of those things where I think that's a great matchup. I think we also have a lot of play with Disciples into Crusher Stampede type lists. So if you look at a lot of those lists, there's not a high volume of attacks. Like the main thing they do, like their main like long range shooting, it's mainly Hive Guard, which they can give +1 to hit and hit rerolls too. Well, guess what? Disciples of Be'lakor literally hard counters simply by showing up at the table, +1 to hits and hit rerolls at range. I think that a lot of their monsters, you know, they can give them their wound rerolls. They don't have a ton of attacks. I don't know. I want to stop talking. I just want to go play this army right now. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not playing Disciples.
Only thing I'll add on to the Crusher is going to get bigger because the rumblings I'm hearing is that screening is going to become really important again really soon. And so Crusher doesn't have very good screening units. It just doesn't. And so if you just keep throwing stuff at those Hive Guard, they protect it. And the same thing goes for their monsters. It's difficult for them to protect the things they have.
Yeah.
So there's definitely play there. And I think Flamers actually do incredibly well into a lot of what Crusher offers if you set it up right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the list's got game. I think Chaos Demons still are going to be kind of that like tier 2 threat at a lot of events, especially events that well-practiced players will be attending. I think there's a lot more room for experimentation. So Chaos is in a good spot again, and that feels nice because let me tell you, it's been a rough year for us Chaos boys.
Tell me about it. Yeah. I mean, the amount of, if I never have to lose a Terminator to a 2 damage attack again, I'll be very happy. I'm not gonna miss that. Yeah, I think it's funny because, you know, literally top Chaos Super player at LVO, top Chaos Space Marine, top Demons. Mark, incredibly sharp Chaos guy. Talk to him on our Discord. Love his insights. I think we're all in agreement that Disciples are looking really good. And the crazy part is, as excited as we all are for Disciples, we haven't even gotten our codexes yet. It's literally only up from here. So if you get the fundamental strategies down, and the tactics, and you learn like, okay, when one of the best uses of the stratagem to go through things, and basically turn to Harlequins. I think if you just get those fundamentals down, you'll be a great player. You'll be looking even better once we get data sheets and stratagems and stuff that reflect with 9th edition. Yeah, well, and I think one of the really exciting things is, I know I'm not promising this right away, but I think we have talked about maybe filming some battle reports down the line, getting kind of our Chaos brains together. You know, Warphammer, there's a bunch of articles we have in the pipe. Weirdly, it's an exciting time to be playing Chaos, as you say. And I mean, congrats again. Seriously, 5-1 at the biggest, most competitive tournament of the year with the list, which, I mean, people look at. Let me say it like this. If your identical list had gone 0-6, people would be looking and be like, yeah, that makes sense. He's got like the friendly list. He was in the wrong tournament. And then 5-1 against some of the toughest lists out there, only losing to Manny's list, which is the spammiest of spam builds, which again, incredibly nice kind person. That list did not make a lot of friends. I think you're only going to be better from here. I think when we're talking about making Alaska kind of getting a little bit of a resurgence as a 40K scene. And Wallace, I can say honestly, both as a friend and as Warhammer author that loves Chaos, I'm super excited to see what you personally do this year. Because I think it was like 2 years ago, your #1 ranked Demons in the entire ITC, and then kind of took a step back from playing as much. I think it's going to be an incredibly exciting year, and can't wait to see more of you on the tabletop, Wallace.
Yeah, I'm get more games in, to go to more tournaments. This is a year where I'll be traveling for GTs again, and I think the scene for Warhammer in Alaska is back. It was gone for a while. A lot of us were not playing at events regularly. Where to play, the interest had kind of died down. Now it's more than just me and Mike. There's a lot of people here that actually want to get games, and there's a lot of skilled players here too.
Yeah,
very excited for that. I'm excited to get my models, dust off some more of the dust, and hopefully next time I go to LVO, we'll get that 6-0. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, Wallace, I can't wait till next year. Now we're going to have another amazing time in Vegas, not only on the tabletop, but I know there's a dim sum restaurant that is very much shaking in fear at the thought of us showing up again and cleaning out their kitchen.
Yeah, we need to get people to go with us next time. That was a lot of fun. So
Yeah, we're a big group. It was really nice because we actually met some of the Warhammer readers. I know, I don't want to list everyone, but I know, for example, the Breakfast at Denny's, Brandon, his friend, had a really nice time. All the people at the tournament. Chaos fans, they're a special bunch, because anyone still playing in the Chaos at this point is not playing because it's the strongest faction, but they're playing it out of love, and they have to be a really creative player to make it work. So shout out to everyone still kind of making their Chaos Demons and Chaos Space Marines work. You're all amazing. And Wallace, I can't wait to see you on the tabletop more in 2022.
it's going to be a good.
It's going to be a great year. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today and listening. Can't wait to see what Wallace does, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And I'm sure I'll have you on again at some point. Awesome. All right, enjoy the rest of your evening. Everyone, thanks so much for listening to Warphammer as always, and have a great day.